All right, we're going to be focusing on clarifying ideas and sentence combination, TEAC 9C. This is just a recommendation. I would suggest you go through all the editing PowerPoints or modules to make sure that you're prepared for this, just so you have the background knowledge in order to start this combination of sentences. So what is revising and revision? You should have already seen in previous PowerPoints, but all it is improving the content and design of a document and making changes to drafts. You're going to consider style and word choice, clarity and concision, and organization and presentation of information. We'll be focusing on clarity, which is 9C. And so within that TEAC, the student is expected to revise drafts to improve clarity, development, organization, style, diction, and sentence effectiveness, including use of parallel constructions and placement of phrases and dependent clauses. And like I said, you need to know what phrases and dependent clauses are before kind of going in and really doing this well. So if you haven't done that part of the editing and revising for the sentence construction, go back and do that PowerPoint first and then come back here. It's going to make it a little bit easier. This skill is about making the content easier to understand and be more specific. What word would be more descriptive? How can we reorganize a confusing sentence? That's kind of what you'll be working with when you're working on this skill. STAAR questions for this often focus on issues of word choice, which is diction, pronoun references, and parallel construction. It's just a matter of understanding them and how to use them in a sentence. So to clarify cohesion and clarity, we talked a lot about cohesion in a previous PowerPoint, but all that is the flow and connection between sentences, paragraphs, or ideas in writing. This makes writing smooth and logical, and it usually is utilizing transition words and sentences or consistent subject or focus. As for clarity, clarity is just making sure that your writing is clear, direct, and easy to follow, and you're avoiding confusing language, vague wording, or overly complex sentence structure. You want to use precise language. You want to avoid ambiguity or wordiness that gets in the way of understanding sentences, and then logically structured sentences that you are making sure that you're placing your sentence correctly, like the dependent clauses, independent clauses, avoiding passive voice. That's kind of talking about the logically structured of sentences. That's going to help with clarity. And so there's a few examples there that we have seen before, but just for clarity's sake, the project was done by them in a way that was effective. That's unclear because we are using passive voice. The main subject, they, is not at the center of this sentence. If you look at the clear example, they completed the project effectively. They is the subject. It's front and center. It makes it really clear. You know exactly what they did. They completed the project. How did they complete it? Effectively. So even though the unclear example is grammatically correct, it is not the most effective. And so that's what we're working on today. So revising for word choice, and remember, when we talk about word choice, we are talking about diction. Diction refers to the choice of words and style of expression that a writer or speaker uses. It plays a major role in shaping tone, clarity, and effectiveness in communication. So not just in writing, but also if you're big on giving speeches, that's something that you are going to be very cognizant of. Revising for diction means evaluating and adjusting your word choices to ensure that they are clear, so you avoid vague or confusing words. Appropriate, so matching the tone and audience, so formal versus casual. And because we're focusing on STAAR, this is formal tone, so we're making those right choices with a formal lens. Your word choice is precise, so you're choosing words that exactly express your intended meaning. So you don't want to be vague at all in any sense. And then consistent. You want to maintain a uniform style and level of formality throughout the entire text. So things should match, right? Your tone should match. How you're expressing yourself should match from the entire paragraph. So revising for diction or word choice, this is what it looks like on the STAAR test. And you're going to see things like most effective, more effective. So Nancy has not used the most effective word in sentence 4. Which word should replace have to create a more effective sentence? And so you're not necessarily going to see a grammar error in here. It's going to be just for effectiveness. So it's going to have you thinking about which word best serves the purpose within that sentence or paragraph. The other one, again, we see that most effective. Once again, you're replacing a particular word. You're having to focus on those different elements. Another one is the pronoun in sentence 18 is unclear. Which word should they replace they with? And that's why you need to know your pronoun, noun, antecedent rules, and that's in another PowerPoint as well. If you don't quite understand those rules, you need to go back because it's going to help you with questions like this. And then finally, another one is a phrase. So we're not just focusing on words, but we can also be having to relate replace phrases within the sentence as well. So word choice and phrase changing in here is what you'll see on that STAAR test. Here is a sample question. Nancy has not used the most effective word in sentence 4. Which word should replace have to create a more effective sentence? And if you take a look, this is a new item type, or it's not so new now. We've seen them quite a few times, but you see a drop down. It's going to give you these different options, but don't worry. It's very similar to like a multiple choice. It's just presenting itself differently. Always think about clear, appropriate, precise, and consistent when making your choices for these questions. All right, let's do a practice question here. So we have the question, the word mixing is not used or is not the most effective word to use in sentence 6. Which word best replaces mixing? And so I highly suggest just helping yourself out, like look at the dictionary if you don't know any of the words that are in your answer choices, or if you don't know what this word is, always look it up. It's going to give you some more insight. I can't pull it up in this PowerPoint here, but you will be able to when you are in your test. Also consider the tip, try inserting each answer choice into the sentence to see which one fits best, and don't forget to use that dictionary. And so I'm just being really repetitive about that dictionary because that is an underused tool that many students can forget about and will miss some questions that could be very easily won. So let's look at that paragraph. The food spoils if it cannot be preserved. The mixing of moisture, bacteria, and air makes food deteriorate quickly. So I'm going to give you a second. I want you to read through that paragraph, and then I want you to make your decision or your choice, answer choice, and then we're going to see if you're right. So go ahead, hit pause, read through this paragraph, make your selection, and then we'll double check your answer. All right, let's see if you're correct. And it's D, combination. Let's take a look at some of these different examples. If you look at mixing, so the mixing of moisture, bacteria, and air make food deteriorate quickly. It sounds like it's a combination of all these different things. Like I'm really just talking through it really helped me answer this question. A merger, if you look that up, you see that more in a tone or jargon, like a word that you use in a business setting. So you wouldn't really see a merger of moisture, bacteria, and air. Neither from mingling too. The mingling of moisture, bacteria, and air makes it sound like they're just friends at a dinner party, right? So mingling is more used in when you are talking about people. A connection. So the connection of moisture, bacteria, and air, it kind of goes on a tangent, or it's not the same as mixing. Like a connection and mixing are two different things, right? We're getting away from the intent of that word, the intent of that sentence by choosing connection. And what we're left with is combination. And you can check in your dictionary and see, sometimes you'll see some words like for synonyms that will kind of help you out as well. You'll say mixing and a combination are very similar. All right, let's look at the next one. Okay, we're looking at the next question. This one is focusing on pronoun, noun, antecedent. So the pronoun in sentence 18 is unclear. Which word should replace they to create a more effective sentence? And so they is unclear because there's no noun antecedent, right? In 17, if we look through, there's no noun that clarifies what they is. So we need this to be clear, right? We're not adding anything in 17, so we need to specify who they is in 18. So go ahead, you need to read the entire paragraph. Once you've done that, I want you to select your answer choice and we're going to see if you're correct. So go ahead and hit pause and go through the work. All right, hopefully you just unclick pause and let's take a look and see how you did. Like I said, you want to focus on sentence 17. You kind of realize that there is no noun in there, so we're having to clarify. A, it's skateboarders. And so with these improvements, skateboarders now had more control and could perform aerial stunts. And so even though none of that is in the previous sentence, we know that they're the ones that are riding the skateboards. It does make sense. Let's just kind of fill in the other ones and see if we are correct. With these improvements, kicktails now had more control and could perform aerial stunts. We know that those kicktails, which are the curved section of the back of the board, they don't ride themselves, so that cannot be correct. So I'm going to mark that out. With these improvements, inventors now had more control and could perform aerial stunts. If we look through any of these, it doesn't sound like inventors are the ones that are riding the skateboards. And even then, it's not offering, even if inventors were riding these skateboards, it's not really specifying exactly who it is. And skateboards just gives us a much more accurate depiction of who's on these skateboards. And then, of course, with these improvements, surfboards now had more control, and that's just not correct. It's not the right intent. We are focused on skateboards for this instance. So A is our correct answer. All right, this next question. April does not think away is the best phrase to use in sentence 28. Which phrase is the best replacement for away in this sentence? So go ahead. I want you to read through the text. You're going to read a sentence, or all of these sentences, but focus on 28 and see what of your answer choices are going to best fix or replace away. And if you're back, let's see, the answer is C, an opportunity. And so this is when looking up the definition is going to be very helpful. So ESPN as a sports network saw an opportunity to introduce the world to this new phenomena. An opening also is very similar, or it can be very close to what you would choose. If you were talking informally, that probably would be correct. However, when you talk about an opening is just like an opening of a door, or it's like an opening of a store. Like, it's not necessarily appropriate because of the definition for an opportunity, which I'll get to in just a sec. Same thing for a break. ESPN as a sports network saw a break to introduce. That doesn't quite fit because, once again, a break can mean something that's broken or something that has taken place, and then there's something that is taking like a pause to introduce the world to a relatively new phenomena, and that doesn't quite make sense in this particular scenario. And finally, ESPN as a sports network saw a room to introduce the world to the relatively new phenomena. That's just incorrect phrasing. We wouldn't say a room. Maybe ESPN as a sports network saw a room to introduce the world, but even then, an opportunity is better suited for this, because if you look at the dictionary, an opportunity is a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something. And at the beginning, it's talking about those circumstances in sentence 26. It's saying that it's become a subculture of the youth, it's gained popularity, it's gone to straight to video films that launched many careers and household names. And so those sets of circumstances have created this opportunity. And so that's why looking up the definition really helps with making that decision for these words, especially when there's some that really could work in some cases. Sentence combination. So sentence combination means putting two or more short related sentences together into one clear, smooth, and grammatically correct sentence. I want you to emphasize grammatically correct sentence. On the STAAR test, you'll often be asked to choose the best way to combine sentences so the writing sounds natural, clear, and not repetitive or choppy. That's why I've had you go through all that editing where you're having to look for vague language, redundant, extraneous, because you want to make sure that when you're writing, you're not using or doing some of those mistakes in your own writing. So what the question is really asking when you're asking to combine sentences, it's can you recognize how to combine the ideas smoothly? Can you avoid run-ons or awkward phrasing? And can you choose the option that sounds the most natural and effective? So remember, when we talk about natural and effective, sometimes those sentences are going to look grammatically correct, but they aren't the most effective way to write it. You want to have the best way to write that sentence. So this is what they look like on the test. We just have some key terms here. You'll see that sentence 19 needs to be revised. Rewrite the sentence in a clear and effective way. So you don't have any multiple choice for those types of questions right there, and you're going to have to write using what you know about good writing, which is concise, appropriate, specific. The other version, you'll see what is the most effective way to combine sentences 2 and 3. So it'll give you 2 sentences that you have to combine. And so you need to know, how do I combine sentences? What's the appropriate punctuation? How do I combine dependent and independent clauses? So all of that knowledge that you've gained through some of these other PowerPoints in your lessons in class are going to help with combining these sentences. And then if you look at the very top right corner here, we'll look at just some things to look for when you're combining sentences. Make sure you have correct punctuation. You need to know how to use your commas, semicolons, colons, correct use of conjunctions. So fanboys, and, but, because, although, your subordinating conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions, all those fun ones. avoiding repetition or wordiness, and making sure the meaning stays the same as the original. Sometimes when we are revising sentences or when we're combining sentences, we can lose the intent altogether. So you want to make sure that you're not changing what that sentence is meant to do. So let's take a look at what that looks like as a multiple choice question. So what is the most effective way to combine sentences 8 and 9? And so let's just take a look at those two. Early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened. Troops were also left malnourished and susceptible to disease, which could be fatal. So just some tips before you go and look at your answer choice. Check for any errors in the choices, because sometimes that'll help you combine them because you're having to fix that error. Look for cohesion and conciseness. So do you see any repetition that needs to be remedied? Is it confusing at all that you need to make clear? And then make sure that you keep the original intent. So go ahead. I want you to take a moment, hit pause if you need to, and then choose your answer and then come back and you'll see if you got it right. All right, your answer is B. Early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, malnourished, and susceptible to diseases which could be fatal. And if you take a look, you should have noticed some repetition in here. So early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened. Troops were also left malnourished. So look how they're doing. So early attempts to provide troops left them, and then they were left again, right? And so we're just separating. It's like we're having to repeat the troops were left. And so I want to make that concise. So I'm going to get rid of that redundancy. So I know that's going to be a key goal for my answer choices. And so if I take a look at some of these, I'm going to see that some of them did not do that. So looking at A, early attempt, or let's look at B, the answer choice first, and then we'll kind of talk about why the other ones are incorrect. So B does that. It gets rid of that redundancy. Early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them, and so it's just one time, and it includes weakened, malnourished, and susceptible diseases, which could be fatal. And so we have weakened, malnourished, susceptible diseases, and then it's fatal. Key information, took out the redundancy, and I've combined my sentences with the appropriate punctuation. So let's just take a look at A. Early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, and troops were also, it's repetition here. If I'm trying to combine sentence, if I want to say with being concise, I'm not going to see repetition like that. So I'm already going to cross it out. And it looks like it is grammatically correct. I think early attempts to prove. Yeah, so I wouldn't, it's not a grammar error, but like I said, it's not concise. C, early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, semicolon, troops were also left malnourished. So left them weakened, also left malnourished. It's not remedying that redundancy, even though it is correctly using that semicolon. It's the same thing. So they just replaced that period with a semicolon. It's not fixing anything. It's still it is combining it because we have a semicolon, but we're seeing that repetition and it's not the best use or the best combination. And then finally, D, early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened and were also malnourished and susceptible to disease, which could be fatal. This is just a bad structure of phrasing. So early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened and were also malnourished. This right here. So were also malnourished. So yeah, that latter part, we're not seeing like who was malnourished, right? We're seeing early attempts to provide provisions to troops left them weakened, and we're also, this right here is kind of really messing up that sentence flow. It's really poor phrasing even here with this comma. That's not the best place to put that. It's incorrect. So we're going to go ahead and mark that off. And B is our correct answer. These commas is awkward phrasing. It's overly complex and it's wordiness. This is not what we want, and it's not fixing what we wanted it to fix, or what we wanted it to fix in 8 and 9 that we highlighted. All right. All right, we're going to take a look at this next one. What is the correct way to write sentence 26? Remember, we want to make it concise, make sure that there's cohesion, it keeps the original intent, and there aren't any errors. So go ahead, read through the text, and then I want you to select an answer choice. Go ahead and hit pause, and then once you have your answer locked in, go ahead and hit play again, and we'll see if you're right. All right, let's take a look. A is the correct answer. And so for this one, you have to look at the sentences before it as well. It's going to give you a little bit more insight into how you need to phrase this sentence. And so I'm going to highlight it. Let me highlight it another color for you. Or just kind of go around it because sometimes it's hard to see. So freeze drying was another dehydration method employed. In preserving coffee and making it instant, freeze drying is frequently used. And so when we talk about cohesion, we want to keep some of the main subject in a particular order in sentences. So the previous one is 25, right? It's talking about freeze drying being another method. In 26, we hide freeze drying all the way over here at the middle or end of the sentence. And so when we're talking about clarity, cohesion, we want that main topic or that main subject at the beginning. Now remember, when we create sentences at the heart are subject, verb, objects. So he runs home. So he would be at the beginning of the sentence. I want that to be the main focus of my sentence. And so when you're playing around with the clauses or phrases, you can move them around to give them emphasis. I want to emphasize freeze drying because that's what I was talking about in sentence 25. So in order to emphasize it, I want it at the beginning of my sentence. And so I'm going to look at any of my answer choices and see if that is the case. And so A already does that. Freeze drying is used in preserving coffee and making it instant. It is a wonderful cohesion and connection to 25 because it's giving me another example of what it's being used as. B, if we look at that, making it instant, freeze drying is frequently used in preserving coffee. It puts making it instant as the most important thing in the sentence by placing it first, and that's not the main point of the sentence. And so it's almost kind of changing the overall intent. Same thing with C, frequently used in preserving coffee is freeze drying, and it makes it instant. It's getting lost in this sentence when it's not the main ordeal. And then preserving coffee and making it instant, freeze drying is frequently used. That's kind of the same sentence. They took out in. And so it's still kind of in the middle there. That would probably be the distractor. But like I said, we want freeze drying as the main subject because of that previous sentence. It's telling us how it needs to be written. I can tell you right now, these questions are hard. Like these aren't like grammatically incorrect most of the time. You're having to make the best choice with what you know about cohesion, about keeping things concise, about being specific, and even how to use syntax to emphasize certain phrases. So you have to keep that in mind because that's how these sentences can be very, very tricky. All right, so on to your short constructed response. So this is what they look like. So in the box provided, combines the ideas in sentence 6 and 7 to create one clear and effective sentence. And so this is just the rubric. You'll probably see some of these rubrics in some modules earlier on, but it just shows the response is a complete sentence that expresses the idea in a clear and effective way. As long as you're combining these well, you're not changing the intent, and the grammar is correct, or at least it's grammatically working for you, you're going to get that one. So these should be easy with a lot of practice. So you'll ask yourself when you're writing your sentence, are there any errors that need to be fixed in either sentence first? So sometimes you can use any errors that you see in these sentences above to make a choice for what you're going to edit. Consider what method is appropriate for combining the sentence. So think about how you combine sentences. Are you going to use a comma conjunction? Are you going to use a semicolon, a colon? Those are things that you can use. Or are you going to have a dependent clause, independent clause combination? So just keep that in mind, all the different ways that you can combine these sentences. And then finally, do not change the original intent and always check for grammar and spelling. So this is just the rubric. It's either a 1 or a 0, whether you get it right or not. We're first going to look at some that got a 0. So once again, these are questions that got a 0. You do not want to do this, but I want you to see how some people were making some mistakes. So our two sentences are up above. Oh, me too. Julian responded teasingly, his face buried in his hands. Then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. And so we're combining 6 and 7 here. So 6 and 7. So look at these different examples, and I want you to avoid the mistakes that they did. So in this one, Julian didn't want his mom to have a chance to tell him to watch his cousin Carlos. And so let's take a look. It looks like it's grammatically correct with some errors with maybe some capitalization, but it got a 0, and I'm going to show you why. So if you take a look on this side, it says the writer does not express ideas in a clear and effective way. Sentence 6 was omitted completely because it doesn't even talk about him apologizing or anything else. And the meaning of sentence 7 has been changed because here it's saying he didn't want to be told to watch his cousin as opposed to not wanting to be scolded. So this is just clearly changing the intent. Even though they have a complete sentence here, it's not correct. It's not doing what the question is asked of them. Let's look at this next one. Apologizing quickly to avoid a scold about disrespect from his mother. So the writer does not express ideas in a clear and effective way. The response is a sentence fragment. If you take a look, there's no end, right? Apologizing quickly to avoid a scold about disrespect from his mother. That's just one dependent clause. We don't have a subject verb. It's not a complete thought. It's not a complete sentence. And I can guarantee you, if you don't have a complete sentence, then you're going to get a 0, especially because it's leaving out information. It's not clear in this sentence who's being disrespectful. It's not clarifying who the person apologizing or whether it's the mother. So it's not clear. It's not a complete sentence. It's a 0. And then looking at this last one, then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. If you know your comma rules, you know that that's a comma splice. And then the writer, they do not express ideas in a clear and effective way. By replacing the period between 6 and 7 with a comma, it's a run-on sentence. It's not correct. Then he quickly apologized. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity, and they just rewrote the sentence. He or she is not combining the sentence at all, especially with incorrect punctuation there. So make sure that you're actually doing what the question is asking you to do. These may seem easy at times, but still take your time and read over read over the answer that you have submitted. Now let's look at those with a score of a 1. And so that 1 means that they did it correctly. They got full points for it. And we're also going to see what they did right. So let's take a look at this one. It's my favorite one that has been submitted. So it says, then he quickly apologized since he didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for having a disrespectful attitude. This is clear. It's effective. It combines the two sentences with the word since right here. And so we talk about this as a complex sentence. Then he quickly apologized. And you still see that here, right? Then he quickly apologized. And we still see that entirety of that sentence, right? They didn't change much. He didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. They wrote that, but they just combined it with this one single word. That's it. That's all it takes. You can write that. You don't have to get fancy with it at all. Looking at this next one here. But he did just use since. So looking at the next one here, he quickly apologized because he did not want his mother to get on to him about his attitude. A little bit different, a little informal if you ask me, but it doesn't change the intent. They are clear, it is effective, and they use the conjunction because. And so they use because to go ahead and combine it. And once again, they're not getting fancy with it that much either. We have he quickly apologized, and that's right here, right? He quickly apologized, and he did not want his mother to get on to him about his attitude. And so this is very similar. Didn't want to scold him for his attitude. Now, like I said, a little bit informal, like when you say on to him, but it's still correct. It's not crazy informal. It doesn't sound like someone's texting somebody. It still sounds like a complete sentence, complete thought, and it is a score of a 1. And then finally, this next one, then he quickly apologized, semicolon, he didn't want his mother to have the opportunity to scold him for a disrespectful attitude. That is the exact same sentence structure, 6 and 7. The only difference is that they've combined it with a semicolon. And a semicolon is a perfectly acceptable way to combine sentences. In a previous module, we talk about compound sentences and combining them with semicolons. But remember, on either side of a semicolon, you need to make sure that it is a complete sentence. Make sure you're using that semicolon correctly. And so the what they did right, so once again, it is clear and effective. They use that semicolon. It's a stylistic way for writers to link their ideas effectively because they do have a connection. He quickly apologized. Why did he quickly apologize? Because he didn't want to be scolded. And so it's just linking those ideas together. And it's just a really neat way to use that and combine and make it a little easier on yourself. So those are different ways to combine it. 3 different ways. I want you to consider that. Like I said, everything you learned in your editing can be used for your own writing purposes. All right, good luck.